Most of you know, before I came to Newman, I was assigned to work for the Jesuit Refugee Service based in our international office in Rome. I moved to Italy right about this time, 5 years ago. And prior to starting my assignment, I took a month to study Italian, since that was a language of the community where I was going to live, and of course, a language of the country. And in typical Jesuit fashion, my superiors thought that all I needed was a month, and I'd be fine and functional after that. So off to Siena I went. I lived with a host family, a widow, who eventually became a very good friend. She hosted students who were in town for the summer, studying the language. She was very happy to have someone a little bit older who didn't stay out too late. But also was curious because she had a priest as her guest. I spent most of the days in language school and then exploring the city, came home for dinner between 7:30 and 8. Because of my schedule and where I lived, I usually went for 6 p.m. daily Mass in what had been the house of St. Catherine of Siena. It was staffed by these wonderful Dominican nuns, and I became part of the rhythm of their daily prayer for those 4+ weeks that I was there. They were never intrusive or nosy. They were welcoming. They were genuinely happy to have yet another stranger be part of their prayer. After Mass, as I walked home, I would always stop in this tiny medieval neighborhood chapel, not much bigger than our daily Mass chapel in the back. It was a Romanesque place, thick, heavy walls, dark and cool, with slits for windows that let almost no light in. It smelled like the 13th century, musty with age, floors and pews worn down by the countless faithful who had darkened its doors. I found great consolation there, sitting in the quiet, praying. And every day, like clockwork, this Italian grandmother, right out of Central Casting, would walk in about 5 or 10 minutes after I got there. She was small. She was bent over. She was usually carrying a small bag of fresh produce, probably on her way home for dinner. And she would walk in. She would turn to the first alcove on the left. She would light a candle and put her hand on the ancient statue of Mary that resided there and greeted her. Buonasera. Good evening. And then she would have a conversation with the Madonna, like it was the most natural thing in the world. She would talk with her hands and tell Mary about her family, a conversation between mothers. It was always, tell your son this, or let your son know that. It was sharing the joys and sorrows of her life and giving the Madonna a daily update so she could pass it on to her son, just like your mother does when you talk to her on the phone. The updates about the neighbors and the rest of the family. And I would catch bits and pieces of the conversation like an interloper watching from the shadows. I never knew if she knew I was there. I don't think she cared. But as the days turned into weeks and my language skills improved a little bit, I would catch more and more of her conversation in her very heavy Sienese accent. And I found myself praying for her family and wanting to find out the latest news about them. How was Andrea's trip to Milan? Did Cecilia ever resolve the issue with her neighbors? And so on. Sometimes she just prayed silently, head bowed in deep meditation. But every day she made her visit, as I imagined she had been doing for years. And every day it started with Buonasera and ended the same way. Ciao, ciao, ci vediamo, ciao. Ciao, ciao, we'll see you, ciao. And she would kiss the Madonna's feet, and off she would go. And I would just sit there, marveling at this wonderful display of faith, familiarity, of openness, a very simple gesture of confidence and trust. The day before I left Siena, on my last day in that small chapel, I sat in plain view so that she would notice me when she entered. She looked at me and nodded, turned to her left, Buonasera, and started her conversation with the Madonna. When she finished, I approached her, a little bit more confident with my language skills, and I said, "Hello." "Ciao, padre," she said. Startled, I asked how she knew I was a priest. She laughed and said, "You're here every day." And then she said, "I know you live with Silvana." She must have seen the look on my face because she said, "Everybody knows you live with Silvana. This is Siena. There are no secrets. Even the Madonna knows." And then she kissed me on the cheek and she asked me to pray for her, and off she went. I never did get her name. I've never seen her since. But I've thought of her often, that example of faith and fidelity that I was privileged to witness for that time. That sometimes trusting in God is simply that. Trusting. Putting yourself in God's hands and letting God work with you and mold you and do with you as God would. This nonna, this grandmother, knew that she had a powerful intercessor in Mary. And through Mary, all of her concerns and her anxieties and gratitude and daily blessings would be shared with her son. In our first reading, Isaiah says, "As a mother comforts her child, so will I comfort you." I think that is what she found. Great comfort in a God who was very present, very tangible, very much in relationship with her. It's the same kind of trust that Jesus was asking of his disciples, the 72 others sent in pairs in today's gospel. Because off they went in mission, asked to rely primarily on God, knowing that God was going to be there, but not knowing how. And that's exactly how it works. Knowing that God is going to be there, but not knowing how. That's putting your trust in God. Too often, we want to know the how. I do. And more often than not, I want to tell God how to do the how. And again, I get reminded that's not how it works. It works very much the way that the nonna figured out. Buonasera. And then you pour your heart out. And then, ciao ciao, ci vediamo, ciao. And then it starts all over again. With a God who is good, and the God who is faithful, and the God who listens, and the God who loves.